Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Launchpad. I am your host, Dave Kluge, and once again, I am joined with two amazing guests from the fantasy football industry. Today, we have Chris Harris with Harris Football, and we have Taylor Cornell with the Who Dey Den podcast. We are going to be looking ahead at some Week 6 matchups and talking about the fantasy football implications of them. We're going to start off by talking about Raheem Mostert and what that Miami backfield could look like going forward. We're going to talk about the Green Bay Packers and Lazard and Romeo Doubs and who the true wide receiver one is. We're going to look at Breece Hall after his breakout performance last week and talk about what his rest of season value looks like. This is an amazing episode with a ton of laughs, so be sure to stick through to the very end of this week's episode of The Launchpad. How high are you willing to rank Raheem Mostert in Week 6? That and so much more on today's episode of The Launchpad. Chris, go ahead and start us off here. It seems as if Raheem Mostert has a stranglehold on the backfield in Miami. Assuming full health, where are you ranking him this week?
So I have him ranked 19th among running backs. So that's pretty much a start, I think. I mean, at least as a flex. Of course, there are a lot of caveats buried in what you just said, which is assuming full health, which I'm going to assume, but I don't think we actually know, and we're not going to know really because he did have something going on this week in practice. And then also just as quickly as it changed, it could change back. You know, it became a Raheem Mostert game plan last week because they lost the quarterback and they had to run, and maybe they'll decide they can go back to more than a 50-50 split. So I can't get higher than 19, but that's where I got him.
So let's just talk about this backfield a little bit, Chris, if you don't mind me picking your brain, because it looked like Myles Gaskin actually supplanted Chase Edmonds as the running back too. Is that kind of how we're looking at this backfield now? Is it Raheem Mostert, Myles Gaskin, Chase Edmonds, or was that just 1 week where things got a little bit wonky?
I don't think we have any way of knowing that. You know, the usage is the thing that they're not going to tell us beforehand, but your eyes aren't misleading you. There were times in the second quarter of the game against the Jets where they needed someone else, someone not Mostert, and it wasn't Chase Edmonds, and we don't know why, and we don't know if it's permanent. We don't know any of it. All it tells me right away is that in no way, shape, or form could you possibly consider using Chase Edmonds in a fantasy league this week. That's for sure. I wouldn't drop him yet because things can change, and the quarterback definitely seems like a big part of it. If you have Tua back, maybe you go back to the more pass-centric gameplay. Maybe that's better for Edmonds, but can't use him this week. I know that much.
Yeah, not dropping him yet. Still holding on for that contingent upside. As we know, Raheem Mostert has struggled to stay healthy historically. Taylor, same question to you, though. Just looking at this Miami backfield a little bit, how are we feeling about Raheem Mostert this week?
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say my fantasy teams are not super thrilled with the Chase Edmonds development. And so we hope those are not long-term. Maybe it was a 1-week thing. Who knows? But Mostert's one of those guys every year seems like he's on my team for one reason or another. And I wouldn't consider myself a Mostert fan. It just happens that way. And he's entering that part of the stretch of the season where you're very comfortable plugging him in as your RB2. He'll rack up a few 100-yard games and hate to say it, but I feel like this usually doesn't last very long for him. Hopefully for his own benefit and his own health, it does this year. But I mean, coming off back-to-back solid games, I think with a quarterback in flux there and who's going to be there this week against Pittsburghers at Minnesota this week, I'm interested in him as my RB2. If anyone has him up in the RB12 range, top 12, that's a little too rich for me, but you know, who knows? Fantasy's a delicate game.
And the one thing I'll say about Raheem Mostert is he has struggled with health. I mean, that's no surprise whatsoever. But he came into the league undrafted. He got almost no touches in his first few seasons. He didn't really see any sort of significant workload until he was 27 years old. So, yeah, he's 30 years old now. He's getting up there in age, but he does not have a lot of tread on those tires. You know, if he's able to stay healthy, we can be looking at a ton of upside for Raheem Mostert this season. But anyway, let me go ahead and get into some guest introductions here. This is now episode 50 of The Launchpad, a little bit of a milestone here that I am happy about. I am joined today with Chris Harris and Taylor Cornell. Last week, I had Matt Waldman and Daniel Harms on, and we dove a lot into the film of these matchups and what we have seen with our eyes more than the spreadsheet. And based on the guests I have on today, I think that we're going to be doing a little bit of that as well, and I'm very excited for it. First of all, let me introduce Chris. You can find him at harrisfootball.com, an amazing podcast that's coming out. What are you doing, Chris? Is it 5 episodes a week, 7 episodes a week? I know you're doing quite a few. Go ahead and let everyone know where they can find the podcast.
I mean, I thought I was hot and bothered with 5, and you're giving me 7. Yeah, 5 a week, Monday through Friday. It's a very filmic interpretation of fantasy football. In other words, I watch every game on film on Sunday. By Tuesday's show, by Tuesday morning, I've watched every single game of that week, and I say what I saw, and then we kind of go from there. Yeah, I got ranks at harrisfootball.com. There's a YouTube channel, youtube.com/harrisfootball. Used to work for ESPN. Been on my own for like 7 years. Just passed 1,000 episodes of the podcast. So,
wow. Here I am, patting myself on the back for making it to episode 50, and then Chris comes on and just hit 1,000. No big deal.
Trump card.
There you go. Love that. And then I'm also joined with Taylor Cornell, a very dear friend of mine who I've been connected with for a few years now. Taylor, we met in the fantasy football industry a few years back, but you have kind of started leaning into your Bengals podcast lately, which is great. So let everyone know where they can find that Bengals podcast.
Yep. So it's called the Who Dey Den, focused obviously on the Cincinnati Bengals, and I'm always promoting that stuff out on my Twitter. But yeah, we got started in the fantasy space, and I dabbled in that kind of content creation for a couple of years, but I would say I've consumed over 1,000 episodes of fantasy football podcasts. So I have that going for me. But yeah, I've leaned a little bit more into the X's and O's football side of things with the Bengals. So having a lot of fun with that, having a lot of great guests on, previewing the upcoming matchups, and trying to keep the fan base from going crazy after every single game. So.
And, I love fantasy football, but I have a feeling that if the Bears were coming off a Super Bowl win, I'd probably lean into talking a little bit more about the Bears. But for me, I would much rather focus on fantasy football right now. So let's go ahead and do that. And we already talked a little bit about this Minnesota Vikings at Miami Dolphins game. Right now, what we're looking at with the quarterback situation, Teddy Bridgewater returned to practice, but they're saying it looks like he probably isn't going to play. Tua Tagovailoa has already been declared out, so we might be looking at another Skylar Thompson game. Chris, if Skylar Thompson gets the start, who do you prefer between Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle?
If you get the start, I prefer Tyreek Hill. If I get the start, I prefer Tyreek Hill. If Taylor gets the start, I prefer Tyreek Hill. I prefer Tyreek Hill no matter what. I don't think one way or the it's not good for either of them to have a quarterback who is, by the nature of him being a 7th round rookie, going to be somewhat limited, and they're going to push the envelope as little as they possibly can throughout the game, I assume, and until the scoreboard tells them otherwise, and they got to go push. And they had to push a little bit against the Jets, and actually almost came back, had a field goal that would have tied it, and missed it. And then as soon as they started, they were down 9, and they asked Skylar Thompson to do more, and you saw his limitations. He's back there patting the ball, and he takes a sack he shouldn't take, any fumbles, and this is as we would expect. They both get lowered. Both of the wide receivers get lowered a little bit, but they're both, for me, well within range because of the type of receivers that they are. They don't need to only catch passes downfield. That's a wonderful benefit if you have a quarterback who is allowed to go downfield, which I don't think Thompson will be right away, but they're both playmakers in the short stuff too. So it's always going to be Tyreek Hill. He's the truly unbelievable, is still, even next to Waddle. I watch those games and I go, yeah, Waddle's really, really good, but nobody's like Tyreek Hill in the open field. So it's Hill for me, but both very usable.
And I think you said it best. It's always Tyreek Hill. I mean, I want to ask the question because some people are trying to, galaxy brain their ways into thinking that maybe Jaylen Waddle is the better player. And Jaylen Waddle, like you said, fantastic talent, but it is always Tyreek Hill. Taylor, do you have anything to add there, or do we want to talk a little bit about the Minnesota Vikings?
No, I mean, I tried for this question. I really did. I tried to look at route trees and where is the defense susceptible. And then I remembered who was starting at quarterback, and I thought, you know what, you can kind of throw out some of that stuff because we have no idea what to expect. I'm on board with the Tyreek train. If you just want to follow opportunities, got twice as many targets as Waddle the last couple of weeks. So in that case, I'm definitely all aboard the Tyreek train as opposed to Jaylen Waddle this week.
So let's talk about the other side of the ball then. Dalvin Cook. I mean, right now he is seeing way below what we have seen historically with his snap rate. He's just not that workhorse running back that we thought he would be. Alexander Mattison just keeps getting touches every single week. So, is it an overreaction? And Taylor, you can start us off here. Is it an overreaction to say that we should start looking at Dalvin Cook as maybe more of an RB2 than this bona fide stud RB1 he's been for so long?
Yeah, I read this and thought to myself, of course, this is an overreaction, until I then started to look and say, well, maybe I'm convincing myself otherwise. Over the last 3 weeks, Dalvin ranks 8th in carries and 11th in fantasy points. So you look at that and say, pretty consistent with what we'd want, maybe not high-end RB1, but right in the thick there of RB1 the last few weeks. But his fantasy finishes those weeks have been 18th, 28th, and 6th. So he's really kind of, last week's big game is propping him up a little bit, and he's not getting the passing game work we would want. So it's going to limit his ceiling a little bit. He's going to be needing those touchdowns to reach the high end RB1. I think the defenses too that he's faced so far, if you look at those the last few weeks, they're not necessarily stalwarts against the run. So you can't even really use that excuse. So I think all those things considered, I'm much more comfortable with Dalvin Cook as an RB2 in fantasy rest of season, as opposed to just assuming he's going to be back at his RB1.
Yeah. And Chris, I want to talk with you about this a little bit as well, because, I'm not a scout, but I watch all the games and I just have not seen the same juice from Dalvin Cook that we have seen in years past. And then meanwhile, Alexander Mattison comes off the bench and puts that spark into the offense. So are we overreacting here? I mean, we haven't seen a 100-yard game from Dalvin Cook yet. His one good fantasy finish came because he was able to score a couple of times. Should we kind of change the way that we're looking at Dalvin Cook?
Who's we?
Me, I don't know, the audience.
The problem is, it's wonderful to say that everybody's an RB2. By those standards, everyone's an RB2. Yeah. If you can name me 11 running backs you want more than Dalvin Cook, then I'll agree, or 12, then I'll agree he's an RB2. Until you can give me that list, he's an RB1, just because that's the nature of the position now. Demanding giant snap counts, which for sure. Now, one of these games, Dalvin Cook was banged up. Madison played like almost an entire half, so the snap counts are going to get a little bit skewed there. But that's even last week, even in his good game, no question about it. Like a third of the time, Alexander Madison's in there. It seems like a plan, very, very intentional by the new coaching staff, not to do what Mike Zimmer did, which is burn Dalvin Cook out and get him hurt at the ends of years. In some ways, this might be better for our Dalvin Cook stocks in general. I think this past game may be the first one where I looked at Cook and said, no, that's the same guy. He looks great. He looked fast. He looked, those first few steps, him and Alvin Kamara are the two that I watch and I go, those first 2 or 3 steps on a run when they have a little bit of a runway are unlike anybody else's. They just glide almost and they're through. So that's hopeful, even though I think you're making good points that he hasn't looked like the whole year. And you're absolutely right. Madison is playing more and is a good player and is going to make some money next year when he's a free agent. Yep. Maybe my whole thing comes down to what I started with, which is that all sounds fine in theory, but show me the guys who are getting the super elite snap counts. And if there are 12 of them, then I'll make Dalvin Cook be the RB2.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a very good point, because right now we've got pretty much Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, Chris McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor. I mean, those 5 are the only ones that feel like RB1s. Like historically, like those are the guys that are getting the touches nonstop. And then after that, even looking, like you said, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, they still have the talent, but they just aren't getting the touches anymore. So I think more so than maybe pushing Dalvin Cook down rankings is just reshaping the way that we start labeling players. Because, when you say an RB1, a back-end RB1 really isn't that much different than a high-end RB3. I mean, the gap once you get out of that like top 5 this year has really flattened a bit.
I don't know if I agree with that, though, because like Eckler got a high snap count this week, but I think, the first 3 weeks of the season, people were saying the exact same thing about Austin Eckler. The snap count's low if he's not going to carry it enough, and then he has his career best rushing game, and suddenly we go, oh, he's an elite RB1. Are you kidding me? Like, I think this stuff gets shaped. Eckler is living proof to me that you can have someone get a workload that protects him and doesn't get him as hurt, but as long as he's getting the high leverage touches, as long as he's getting near the end zone, he can be fantastic. He can score a lot of touchdowns and be really great for fantasy. But maybe the best thing we can kind of agree on in the conversation is that Madison's a good player. The Vikings seem to realize it. And maybe some of those high leverage situation touches might be leaving Dalvin Cook. And that would really be a problem.
So the last question I'll have about Dalvin Cook right now in PPR formats, he is sitting at the RB14. For the rest of the season, are you taking the over or the under at RB14?
Me over. I mean, in other words, like better than that. I don't know whether that's,
Yeah. I think that's the right way. Yeah. And Taylor, same question to you. Do you think he finishes above or below? Maybe above or below was better than over under. Above or below RB14?
Well, I have to say below if I said RB2, unless I'm going to flake and say push. He finishes as the RB14.
He's the 13. Yeah.
There you go.
So by default, I have to. But, if Chris keeps talking, I might change my mind. So we'll see.
Very convincing guy. The last thing I want to talk about in this game is Irv Smith. Irv Smith is now averaging 5.8 targets per game. Not great, but with the wasteland that tight ends have been this year, you got to chase the usage, and that's up there. So now with TJ Hawkinson and Darren Waller both on bye this week, are you comfortable streaming Irv Smith? Taylor, start us off here.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I think when you talk about the tight ends being in wasteland's the word used a lot, but I think that however you want to describe it, it's that it's so unpredictable outside of your top couple of, the week 2 game, I think it was, where Baltimore decided to use Isaiah Likely a lot, and he has a great game. It's like, where did that come from? And then they don't use him a lot. It's pretty unpredictable after those top guys. But Miami's given up the 4th most receptions to tight ends so far this season. And yes, a lot of that did come against the Baltimore Ravens. But they've also given up some other productive tight end days. New England had 53 yards from their tight ends. Hayden Hurst scored a touchdown in week 4. Buffalo had 6 for 47. It's not sexy, but again, if you're relying on Hawker, Waller, and those guys are out, I think you could do a lot worse than Irv Smith this week.
So, Chris, same question to you. I mean, obviously the offense is going to run through Justin Jefferson, but do you see something in this Miami defense where maybe they could be susceptible to the tight end and Irv Smith could be a decent streaming option?
I'm going to be, I like everything Taylor said, like sound good to me. I actually usually don't dig into tight end matchups all that closely because my general impression is that when teams want to stop a tight end, they can. It's a certain look, and you can, you sort of make that week's game plan decides, yes, let's stop or let's not stop. I think a lot of what Taylor said sounded smart to me. I have Irv Smith like 11 this week. It's fine with me. It's just, I mean, I have Taysom Hill 3. Everybody after that, like put him in a hat. Sure, I'll stream him, but I don't feel strongly about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for checking me on that because I was going through my rankings today and I had Taysom Hill at tight end 4. And I said, this doesn't feel right at all, but you got to put him up there because you're chasing ceiling and his ceiling is arguably as high as anybody else's besides maybe Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. Let's go ahead and switch to a different game though. And I think this is the premier matchup of the week that everybody is fired up about. The 4-1 Buffalo Bills travel to Kansas City to face off against the 4-1 Kansas City Chiefs. Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, it just doesn't get any better than that. But let's talk about Gabe Davis because he had an ankle injury that was probably affecting him for a couple of weeks. He missed a game, and then he had one game where he came out like a decoy, and then in the next game he came out and wasn't doing much of anything at all. But we all saw what happened last week. 171 yards, 2 touchdowns. So, Chris, start us off here. I mean, is this just going to be boomer bust Gabe Davis, or what we saw last week, is that kind of a sign of things to come in the future?
It's boomer bust Gabe Davis. I mean, these were basically 2 huge plays, right? One of them from their own 2-yard line. I don't think it's bad. I mean, there's not a lot of guys who can boom like this. So It's not bad. We need to play boom bust players, right? We need them because if you're just looking for consistent guys, it runs out at about number 7 among wide receivers. This is kind of the Mike Williams theorem when Keenan Allen is right and dominating targets. That Mike Williams was always like, well, you're going to have 5 weeks where you're going to be really happy and he's going to win you a week. And I think that's where we have to be with Gabe Davis too. There's really nothing about him as a player or how they use him that screams, just you watch, there's an 11 target game coming. But I don't care so much because Josh Allen's a badass. Can I say badass? And
we'll beep it out.
Yeah. There's not an offense you'd rather have the number 2 boom bust type player. The booms are going to be unbelievable. I can't quite give him Mike Evans level boom bust because he's not quite the red zone monster that Mike Evans is, but he's got to be kind of in that conversation, I think.
And that's the one main thing that is missing from his repertoire. And I wish that they would utilize him like that a little bit more because he's got such a big body and he's great at contested catches. I wish he was getting these end zone and red zone targets. And it seems like we saw last week, they're okay throwing when they're backed up in their own end zone, but they won't throw it to him when they're in the other team's end zone. I don't really understand it. But yeah, I'm with you, Chris. And Taylor, I sure you're on board as well. At this point, you just got to keep playing Gabe Davis. You don't want to get cute and bench somebody like Gabe Davis who has that type of upside. So he's going to burn you some weeks, but then when he has that week where he goes for 171 yards and 2 touchdowns, you probably win that week, even if you started Nyheim Hines or T. Higgins or anybody else. So let's go ahead and talk about Devin Singletary because he's getting volume on an explosive offense. That's exactly what you want to see from a running back, but unfortunately, we're just not seeing a lot of fantasy production coming from it. So let's talk about, buy, sell, hold. Taylor, what are we supposed to do with Devin Singletary here?
Well, if I think of a word to describe Devin Singletary, I think unexcited is kind of how I feel about him. And it's not anything against him. He looks okay when he's playing and he's got his role, but I'm just not I'm unexcited about him as a fantasy asset. And a lot of it comes down to the type of usage he's getting. I mean, the Bills have 7 carries within the 5-yard line. Josh Allen has 6 of those. And that's probably not a trend that we're anticipating is going to drastically change. When they get into the goal line area, it's going to be the Josh Allen show, and he's going to score a lot of those touchdowns. So although it's a high-powered offense, it's Diggs and the boomer bust Gabe Davis and maybe Dawson Knox peppered in between the 20s. And then it's going to be a lot of Josh Allen after that. So I think if you look through his game logs, he's got, one really great game, and he got 11 targets that day on that game. And Josh Allen threw it 60 plus times. So I don't think that that's going to happen every single week. More realistically, you're probably gonna get a lot of those 7 carries, 40 yards, and hope he gets some sort of dump down touchdown. So I'm unexcited about him. I guess that makes him a sell for me.
So let me just ask you, did I hear that correctly? You said they have 7 carries inside the 5-yard line, and 6 of those went to Josh Allen. Was that correct?
That is according to Pro Football Reference. So you can fact
I think
check.
it's right. Yeah, I think it's right.
I've watched the games, and that's what my eyes have told me.
Yeah.
But hearing that actual number is mind-blowing, that only 1 carry inside the 5 has not been in Josh Allen's hands.
Exactly.
That's wild stuff right there. So, Chris, same to you. Just real quickly here. Buy, sell, hold. What are we supposed to be doing with Devin Singletary?
At least he's not Devin Singletary anymore. That's kind of cool. I'd love to sell. I just don't know if there are a lot of people who are in the buying market. I think, boy, that was such a good analysis. I don't really have that much to add. Like, that's exactly right. He's attached to a great offense. There's a chance every so often he accidentally pops one in, but you're going to be pretty, you're going to get mostly work between the 20s. They definitely are working other running backs in. I mean, the kid, Cook, scored in kind of basura time, as I like to call it, garbage time. But no, he's at least a hold. I don't know, if you could sell him for something good, that'd be great. Maybe he could be like an attachment to a trade where you're doing like a 2-for-1 and you're getting a better running back. That'd be okay. I'm on board with that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the Kansas City Chiefs. And this is going to be a really, really simple question, Chris, and I'm going to throw it up to you first. Can you start any wide receivers on the Chiefs?
You can, but I don't think you really want to. I did this actually for my show on Thursday. I watched Juju's routes, all of his entire route situation from this last game against the Raiders. And like, there's certainly truth in advertising with Juju, and he's the only one who I would really want to consider. I think I might have Marquez Valdez-Scantling like number 50 this week, and I'm not using Nicole Hardman, period. He played fewer than half the snaps last week. Part of that might be related to a heel injury or something, and I think we saw him like wincing in agony at one point on the sideline, but he came back in the game. I'm not using Hardman. I'd really rather not use MVS. The question comes down to Juju, and he is what he is. Like, he's not separating, shocker of shockers. He's never separated in his life. He plays, mostly in the slot, a little bit on the outside. There's a lot of crossers. They tried to manufacture a couple of red zone touches for him in the Raider game. And one of them, they were back-to-back plays. One of them was like almost like a flip that was supposed to be a shovel pass, but got knocked away. One was a little crosser where, again, the defender's right on him in his hip pocket, and the throw's like a little lofted throw, bounces off his hand. It feels like those 2 seasons of there were 2 out of 3 years where Ben Roethlisberger just didn't care. All he saw was Juju running crossers, and he knew he was covered, and he just would go here and again and again and again. And you need that kind of commitment to make that kind of player be good for fantasy. The touchdown luck has probably been a little bad. He's run basically every route there's been to run. He's got no touchdowns. He's going to score at some point, but I'm not seeing any, the kind of player Juju is. You got to be committed to using him even though he's covered, and the Chiefs obviously have higher priorities.
Yeah, so I think one thing I want to talk about, and we can kind of zoom out and just look at Juju Smith-Schuster as a whole rather than just this week. I just don't really understand what happened to Juju Smith-Schuster. Like you said, he runs those crossers, he runs a lot of slants, and he used to catch the ball and then get yards after the catch, and now he catches the ball and falls over immediately.
Or drops it. I mean,
or
he'll drop against the Raiders too.
So what's going on with this, Chris? I mean, this was a very, very talented receiver just a few years ago, and now it seems like he's just lost his magic.
I don't think we have a big enough sample size of him catching the ball with a chance to run to say that he no longer can do that. I'm trying to be charitable to the player and just say, I think largely the Chiefs have adjusted to a world where they don't really need a receiver to be dominant. And they're not dominant offensively. This is not we're all stuck in 2018. We're all stuck in 50 Patrick Mahomes touchdowns, and defenses have no idea what to do. And suddenly Tyreek Hill just tricks everybody and is by himself. Like, this is just that's not the NFL world we live in anymore. Defenses don't play that way anymore. And they flat out don't have that guy anymore. And they have moved on. They have adjusted to a world where they run a lot, where it's a lot of Kelsey, and then they mix in wide receivers, which is a really different approach. And that's all a way of probably being a big jerk and excusing Juju when maybe he doesn't need to be. But I do find that what I see is mostly, I mean, 8 targets, 3 catches against the Raiders. That's awful, right? But 1 drop, and then everything else wasn't really catchable. He's not that open. Like, I don't know if like his after the catch stuff is really gone as much as there just isn't a commitment to have him be in the open anymore.
Yeah, it's a lot. It kind of reminds me of Allen Robinson during his time in Chicago, where he was never really open, but they would just force feed 150 balls every single season to him, and he'd somehow finish the year as a wide receiver 1. That's kind of what we saw with Juju in Pittsburgh, and he's just not getting force fed like that anymore.
I think that's right.
The last thing I want to talk about here, Taylor, and you can start us off here. I'll be honest. I don't even really have a question. I just want to talk about the Kansas City backfield. You know, we're looking at Clyde Edwards-Helaire just keeps finding touchdowns, and when he doesn't, he's a liability in your fantasy roster or in your fantasy lineup. We got Isaiah Pacheco, who runs hard and looks pretty juiced up and adds a spark to the offense, but it seems like they just refuse to use him anywhere outside of the 20s. And then you got Jerick McKinnon, who did his best Derrick Henry impression last week and just carried the entire defense 20 yards downfield. So what are we supposed to be doing with this Kansas City backfield?
Gosh, I have no idea. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the weirdest RB1 5 weeks into the season, and maybe I'm biased because he's on a couple of my teams, so I'm feeling it every week where I'm like, wow, he did 15 points again. Like, how did he do that? I mean, he's eclipsed 50% snap share just once. He's got a game with 19 carries, and his other 4 games he's got 31 carries combined, which is just like, it's not even consistent in necessarily how he's being used. Is he going to be high carries, low targets, low carries, high targets? I don't know. The touchdowns are nice. He's got 5 of those already. Someone other than Travis Kelce has to score them. So hopefully it continues to be him. But I will say he does not instill a ton of confidence in me. I mean, he would be one that we don't have to get into trade talk again, but he would be one, like, if I have him and I can trade him for somebody that's maybe I feel more confident, more talented player that has disappointed so far, I'd be looking to move off of, because it's just, he's a weird RB1, man.
And the problem is, it's like everybody kind of sees through it. There were a few drafts that I did this year where, you know, I wasn't huge on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but I play ADP, and if he slid to the 8th, 9th, 10th round, I'd take a shot there. And now I have all of these rosters with Clyde Edwards-Helaire where I would love to be able to move him, and I can't, because nobody wants. Everybody feels like he is this fraudulent RB1. Yeah. So, Chris, can you try to shine a little bit of light maybe on what's happening in this Kansas City backfield?
I mean, we're not counting CEH as one of the ones who are ahead of Dalvin Cook, right? In our estimation.
Absolutely not. No.
Yeah. No, I can't. I mean, he's not that good of a player, right? In the bottom, he's fine. But the thing about, I think the way we think about players is we're so used to ranking players that we think of number 27, not even just like the 27th most talented running back in the league, whatever that means, right? We think of that as being like, well, that's a lot better than whoever's number 37 or number 47 or number 57, when in fact, there's a vast leveling off of talent, and that a small guy who's like pretty athletic, but not crazy athletic, and, you know, has some pretty good power, but not great power, and catches the ball fine, but isn't like a demon in space. I think every team has like 3 of those guys.
Yeah.
And like, I think Edwards-Helaire, a first-round draft pick, has kind of turned into one of those guys who's fine, but everything we're heaping on him fantasy expectation-wise feels like it's related to the team he's on and the prayer that we're sending into the air that he gets used in a certain way. And it's obvious the Chiefs don't care about our fantasy teams, because there are, you know, the plan probably against the Raiders was to use CEH a lot. He just sucked real bad, and they were losing, and they went, let's hit this McKinnon guy who's been 3rd string. Let's see if he can spark us. And I loved your line about Derrick Henry, because I remember that one run where they're trying to pull the ball away from him, and he's just like, I'm going to keep going, you know, Hulk smash. It was great. So yeah, you keep using CEH, but you really would love to trade him.
Yeah, and we saw that last year in the playoffs, where they didn't even trust him at all in the playoffs. And I love what you said about him being, you know, probably, you know, somewhere outside of the top 20 running backs. And the first player I thought of was Khalil Herbert, who's good at a lot of things, not exceptionally great at anything. And I think if you swap CEH and Khalil Herbert, you're looking at very similar output.
I got to say, I think Herbert's better. I mean,
I'm
not just
whatsoever.
I'm not sucking up to the Bears fan here. I seriously, I love his lateral agility. I think he's got more burst.
Good vision.
Yeah, I just kind of think CEH is fine. Like DeAndre Washington. I think he's fine. Like, he's a guy.
I've been watching CEH as long as he's been in the league now. And we talked about this last week on the show with Matt Waldman. But when he had that play in week 2 where he actually broke off a breakaway run, and I think it's the first time I've ever seen him actually bust through the secondary, he had no clue what to do. I mean, he's holding the ball like he's in between the tackles, and he's looking side to side. He didn't know what to do in the open field. I mean, it's a strange situation that he's in, but he's got that first-round price tag, and they just keep feeding him because of it. Before we get into the next game, though, anybody that watches this show knows that we are sponsored by Sleeper. We absolutely love Sleeper here. Really fun platform to play fantasy football on. And we are going to dive into our Sleeper starts of the week.
It's time for the Sleeper start of the week, powered by Sleeper.
Taylor, go ahead and start us off here. Who is your Sleeper start of the week?
Yeah, you're killing me on this because I had a guy in mind, and he's a Thursday night guy, so can't throw him in here. But if Darnell Mooney has a great game, that's because I was gonna say Darnell Mooney.
And if he doesn't, we'll just crop this part.
If he doesn't, it's out. It doesn't count because it wasn't legit. And then I was struggling also because Sleeper, it's got so many different meanings. It's got to be a guy that's awful that we think is going to be good. Maybe not necessarily. Some of these guys that I'm like they're going to outperform this week's rankings is like they're already ranked so high. I'm looking at good players, my bad, but I'm looking at like Stephon Diggs. It's like, man, this is the game against Kansas City where he's just going to get force-fed targets, and Gabe Davis stole 100. I'm going to say stole because he did not earn that 98-yard touchdown. He stole some yards from Stephon Diggs last week, but it's like Diggs is already like a top 5 guy in everybody's rankings. I think Leonard Fournette's going to have like a top 2 week, but he's already ranked as top 5. So I'm really bad at the sleeper game. All that to say, my guy was Mooney. He's been stolen from me, and so I'm gonna go with whatever Chris says here.
You know what? And that's totally fine because I actually have Stephon Diggs is my wide receiver 1 this week, and Leonard Fournette is my running back 2. So for people that are playing DFS, obviously if you have these guys on your fantasy team, you're starting them and not even thinking twice about it. But if you're playing DFS or anything like that, these are guys that I am targeting very heavily this week for the exact reasons you said. Chris, who is a guy this week that you are really excited about starting?
Is this the Lockett conversation that we were having?
It absolutely is. Lay it on me. I love Tyler Lockett. Let's talk.
I think most people are going to have a hard time sitting Tyler Lockett in the first week of bye weeks where he's coming off 2 long touchdowns and the Seahawks offense looks pretty good and Arizona's going to blitz like crazy. And so hopefully there's some downfield shots to be taken. But I don't know, you're telling me that he's being viewed by the market as more like a kind of I guess he's a wide receiver 3. And for me, especially with these 4 teams off, I think Lockett is like a locked in, like high level. I have him 15 or something. Mm-hmm. I'd be using both Seahawk receivers. I have Metcalf higher than that. Like, this is never going to be a judgment that somehow one style of receiver is somehow, more appropriate for Geno Smith. No. I mean, DK Metcalf is the stud and is the dude who can break a game open from anywhere, almost doing anything on a field. And Lockett is a particular kind of player, but he's really fast. He's really smart. He improbably gets open down the seam in ways that you'd think the NFL would have learned by now. He's only been doing it for 10 years, but it happens all the time, and it's happening with Geno as well. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's a sleeper because, again, probably in bye weeks, a lot of people were thinking about using him. But for me right now, until we see something different from Geno, both those guys have to be in lineups.
Yeah, and I think the reason Lockett's so good, people just have this, misconception that Tyler Lockett is nothing but a downfield burner. And we hear about this all the time, that he's this boomer bust guy. All he does is blow the top off the defense.
Not true.
He's gonna have a 3 touchdown game followed by nothing. That could not be further from the truth. Early on in his career, for the first 3 or 4 seasons, that's what he was doing. And then Doug Baldwin retired. And Tyler Lockett became the new Doug Baldwin. I mean, he is that guy that can run short to intermediate routes and get open just about anywhere. He can find those soft spots in the zone. And then, like you said, you have to play tight on him because he's such a good route runner. And then he's got that speed that when you think that he's going to be running a hook, he could just blow the top off the defense. So he really does everything. And 4 straight years, Tyler Lockett has been a top 16 wide receiver. And now he loses Russell Westbrook, and people were drafting him as wide receiver 47 this year. Yes, I'm sorry, Russell Wilson. Yes, this is not my fantasy basketball show. Russell Wilson loses him, and then people just act like this guy can't play football. That was one of the most head-scratching decisions this offseason, was everybody's commitment to just pushing Tyler Lockett almost to undraftable territory.
Yeah, that was too low. I think I probably was higher than consensus on Lockett, but I mean, also after the first 2 weeks, I wasn't exactly crowing about having Tyler Lockett on my teams. And in week 3, he was not in any lineups of mine because it was poor. So like, this could turn around. Geno is still Geno. There is some level of quarterback that can ruin even a DK Metcalf and a Tyler Lockett. It's just that for 3 straight weeks, Geno has proven to not be that guy. And not only, like, this is not Blake Bortles. This is not like, I dug myself a hole by being terrible and now I'm going to throw 700 yards.
Right.
He's been terrific. Geno Smith in this game against the Saints, he was absolutely terrific in that game. He would be the envy of any quarterback in the league, some of those throws. Do I have a question of whether he can keep it up? You know that I do, but that's why I don't need to make a decision in the long term. I'm not trading him away, right? In the short term, we're just starting Lockett. I think you said it really well.
The one last thing I'll say about this is, we talk about, obviously Tyler Lockett has the deep ball, and we saw Geno drop 2 dimes just in a bucket in the end zone last week. That was unbelievable. But in those short parts of the field where Tyler Lockett gets the majority of his targets, 0 to 9 yards, Geno Smith has the highest catch rate. He's completing 86% of his passes between 0 to 9 yards. He's got the best on target rate. And then just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and throw this out here. Russell Wilson is 3rd worst in the league on those short passes right now. He just cannot complete them. The only quarterbacks with a lower percentage of completion in 0 to 9 yards, Justin Fields and Baker Mayfield. So, got a lot of scrutiny for that trade in the offseason, but looking like, the Seattle Seahawks might have made a pretty good deal there. Let's go ahead and pivot, though, talk about another game here, and I want to talk about Cincinnati Bengals, and of course, we are going to be starting off with Taylor on this one. Taylor, shine a little bit of light here. Are we concerned about Marcus Lattimore? He's probably going to be shadowing Jamar Chase, and he is a very physical receiver that has shown that he can really shut down some of the best wide receivers in the league. So it looks like T. Higgins isn't going to play this week, which adds another layer to this game plan. So if there's no T. Higgins, and if Marshawn Lattimore is shadowing Jamar Chase, should we kind of temper expectations for Chase this week?
Well, shoot, this would have been the perfect sleeper for me. That'd be Hayden Hurst there. I think he could have a nice game. But really for the Jamar Chase conversation, and Lattimore also is working through an injury as well, and it truly sounds questionable at this time from, I got a plug. I just talked to John Hendricks, who covers the Saints for Sports Illustrated, and he was talking through, like, he's really not sure whether Lattimore is going to play or not. And if he doesn't play, then obviously this all goes out the window. But even if Lattimore plays, really where Jamar Chase has struggled this year is the type of coverages. And I don't even say he struggled. Joe Burrow has struggled getting him the ball there. But if they're going to play one-on-one, and then you kind of saw the Saints do that against the Vikings a couple weeks ago, Justin Jefferson was matched up one-on-one with Marshawn Lattimore, and Justin Jefferson had a pretty good game against Marshawn Lattimore because the receivers have the advantage, and Justin Jefferson's one of the best in the league. And if they do that again, I think you're going to see Jamar Chase have an outstanding game. Even if they shade some coverage over there, I think we've seen the Bengals be, with varied results. They've been a little bit better the last couple weeks trying to manufacture touches for Jamar. You saw him in the backfield last week. You saw him catch a couple screens. So regardless, we're starting Jamar Chase as it relates to expectations. I do kind of think this feels like a get right week for him, especially if T is out. They're going to be relying on him and my new sleeper, Hayden Hurst.
All right. Love it. Chris, do you have anything to add on this? Because obviously Jamar Chase has been kind of disappointing this year, but he's got the speed, and pure speed is the one thing that Marshawn Lattimore seems to struggle with. So could this be a get-right game, or are you tempering expectations a bit?
I guess it doesn't matter. I hate to be a jerk and say it doesn't matter. It's kind of what Taylor said. Like, just starting him. You're using him no matter what. I don't know. I like Lattimore had a couple of really great games early in the year where he shut down a couple of pretty great receivers, but I saw Jefferson do great work against him. Didn't we just talk about 2 Seattle receivers who had great games? Not always against him, but some of them. Yeah. Some of the Metcalf plays were against him, and then he himself is injured. I don't know. I don't want to hijack the question, but I kind of want to ask Taylor about the offensive line, because if Chase has struggled, if Burrow has struggled, I don't have any question about those guys' ability or any question about the scheme or anything else. To my eyes, but not, I'm focused on 32 teams, not on one team. Like, to my eyes, this feels like it's all related to timing problems that come back to what like offensive line problems, running back, like it's all comes to the offensive line. I mean, I'd love any insight for my own knowledge because I'm not feeling
Let's
it.
hear it. They spent a bunch of money into this offensive line, and it's just not gelling so far. Are there any things that we might be,
I mean, I would say the last couple weeks, the line has been better than what they were. And I guess the bar is low because they were atrocious the first couple weeks of the season. Granted, they were going up against the TJ Watts and Micah Parsons of the world. So that kind of magnifies any issues you have. There are still some, and this feels like a cliche, but I am actually believing it now. And maybe it's just because I'm a biased fan, but there is something to be said about the chemistry along this line, because there were so many miscommunications early on in the season where it's like, this is not a play that Alex Kappa, Ted Karras, Lyle Collins should have trouble, communicating on. And we've seen that improve. So I think you're right. The offensive line has made it hard for Joe Mixon. He also hasn't helped himself in a lot of ways. And we saw them improve the last couple of weeks. And you saw the running game last week kind of have those safeties creep up a little bit. And Burrow didn't hit any of the deep shots to Chase that they took last week, but it did open up some more of those opportunities. So a lot's going to depend on run blocking, Joe Mixon doing his job. And then I think that's going to open things up for the rest of this offense.
So I think that's a perfect segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which is Joe Mixon. I mean, he's getting, again, an explosive offense with a lot of volume. That's exactly what you want to see, kind of what we were talking about earlier with Devin Singletary. But just like Devin Singletary, we haven't seen a ton of production yet. I mean, Joe Mixon, I'm looking right now, he has had 96 rushes, almost leading the league in volume so far, but he's only had one touchdown on the ground so far. And then you look at some of the efficiency metrics, and Chris, I don't know how you feel about these efficiency metrics, but when I start talking about, rushing yards over expectation per attempt, and he has not looked efficient. And this is not the Joe Mixon that we have seen in years past. So Taylor, I'm not sure how you feel about Joe Mixon. I'm sorry if I just offended you, but he has not looked good. Is there any chance that Samaje Perine or maybe even Chris Evans can force a committee here?
The answer is no.
All right.
I mean, the answer is absolutely. I actually don't think Mixon's looked that bad. I think I know the plays that Taylor's talking about. There have been times where it's just felt like he's almost been trying to do too much on runs, where like he just has so much ability. He's so talented, such a good running back that as he has felt pressure to do more, as the offense has struggled, I got to say, Zach Taylor sticks with the run almost to a point where even I, like a huge Joe Mixon fan, like just is like, maybe take a break, buddy. It's not working. Like there are times where it feels like Mixon is just pressing and like trying to make the extra cut and trying to make just go forward. And but I still think I thought against the Ravens, there were some runs where he just looked like himself and they look great. He looks different than most running backs for a guy his size to be as laterally quick, to have a first step that's not at the level of like Cook and Kamara, but really good. I still think I see plenty of excellence. And, I would love I love hearing actually that Taylor, who is much closer to the situation than I am, feels like he sees it improving and that this is much more a mental thing, like a gelling thing, much less Lyle Collins is just done. That would be a much bigger
I sure
problem.
hope not.
Yeah. And so that, to me, that all sounds like we're going to see things get a lot better.
So it seems like there's kind of two camps right now on Joe Mixon. You've got, half of the people saying Joe Mixon is dust. He's terrible. Go ahead and just get him off your rosters wherever you can. And then you got another half saying it's only a matter of time. The volume's there. He's still young. He's still talented. I guess what field would you fall into, Taylor?
Well, I've been extremely critical of Joe Mixon the last 3 weeks because prior to last week, because he's looked like Tushy out there. And kind of what Chris was saying, he's trying to do too much where he's not taking what's blocked for him. And the Bengals have been running a lot of wide zone. And it's like Mixon is just waiting for that cutback lane to open up so he can cut back. And instead, he's dancing, pitter-pattering his feet. I believe there used to be a Bengals running back that was like a hippopotamus on skates that Chris might remember from back in the Jeremy Hill days. And I don't want to at all say Joe Mixon is Jeremy Hill by any means, but he's kind of looked like that in some of these games. And last week, for people that don't watch Bengals games, they just look at the box scores. They got Joe Mixon on their teams. I think a really promising development was they went away from the wide zone as much, and they ran a ton of shotgun handoffs and told Joe Mixon to get north-south, and you saw him get 5 or 6 yards. And they didn't say, hey, go wide zone and try to press the crease and do too much. And I think if they stick with that sort of scheme, you're going to see a lot more efficiency out of Joe Mixon than what we've seen the last couple of weeks.
Too much like running towards the sideline.
Yeah.
Joe Mixon this year until last week, it's felt like, and that's exactly what you're so right. It's the outside zone where the running back's trying to be patient when you're just like, man, just go.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't need to hit a home run here. Just get us 6 yards, you know, and it's there and he's not hitting it. But I really don't think he's dust. I really don't.
Well, that's good to hear because I have a lot of Joe Mixon on a lot of teams. So like hearing that. The last thing I want to talk about in this game, though, is Taysom Hill. And I'll throw this question up to you first, Chris. How many tight ends, if any, are you ranking ahead of Taysom Hill this week?
We just said that. You have 3 ahead of him and I have 2 ahead of him, right?
And I don't do rankings, so that's the gospel right here. It's got a 2.5 is the cumulative or whatever average. You guys go with it.
So, I mean, we are firing Taysom Hill up with confidence, but I mean,
no.
Does he have any sort of floor? I mean, we're putting him as tight end 3.
That's not confidence. I'm the one who putting him at 3. There's no confidence there. There's just no confidence in anyone else either. Do you have Goddard ahead of him? Is that your?
Kyle?
You have him ahead of Goddard, rather.
Yeah, I have. For me, it's Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, who I'm hoping could have a bounce back this week.
Good luck.
That's a very, very hot call. I'm aware. You know, my tongue is burning with that one. But and then I have Taysom Hill as my 4th.
So and I got to admit, I didn't put Pitts into my initial ranks, but probably it sounds like he is going to play. So by the time people see this, it's possible he'll be in. But he's going to be below Taysom Hill. I can tell you that. But I've got it ahead of Hill. But yeah, I mean, of course it's a floor of nothing. But have you met Gerald Everett? You know,
right.
Good luck. David Njoku. Oh, yay. Cool. George Kittle. Yeah. Very excited to use George Kittle right now. You know, I'm just going to take the chance that I get a touchdown. I mean, tight end should be abolished as a position in fantasy. It's not the NFL anymore. It comes from a time when it was a real position. Dave, you've heard me say this probably while you've been on my show, but Cooper Kupp played a lot more snaps at tight end last year than Kyle Pitts did. Like, what are we doing? It's not a position anymore. Let's just fold them all in together. We need a movement.
So I really like when you're in a league where you have that wide receiver tight end flex spot where you can choose one. And then what they do is they give an added bonus, the tight end premium, where you get an extra half point if the guy is designated as a tight end. Is that a little too cute for you, Chris?
I just don't think it's needed. We don't need to be rostering frickin' Ty Conklin. You know what I'm saying? Like, we just don't. We just don't need it. Like, the fantasy isn't fun because you roster Jawan Johnson, Will Disley. You know, it's just not. That's not what makes fantasy fun. Kelce, Andrews, Kittle, when he's good, like the true studs of the position are not going to see their draft position fall at all. They're going to still stay really elite because they're great players. Even if you have a flex with no bonuses, they'll be perfect, and then we won't have to bother with frickin' Ty Conklin.
Yeah. Travis Kelce, if he was listed as a wide receiver, would still be getting drafted as a top 5 wide receiver. Well,
yeah, I mean,
because I want to talk about the New York Jets, the last game we're going to cover here. We don't have enough time to cover all 5 games today, but I do want to cover the New York Jets. And Chris, Tyler Conklin, is he a tight end 1? No, completely kidding. We are not going to talk about Tyler Conklin.
Hey, he was for a couple weeks. He was for a couple weeks with Flacco.
I want to talk about Breece Hall, though. And Chris, we did talk about this show. About this backfield on your show a couple weeks ago. And I think we were both kind of in agreement that Michael Carter, you know, had looked good to start the season, but it was only a matter of time. And I think that time has come. I mean, we saw Breece Hall unleashed last week. So is it too spicy to say that Breece Hall is a top 5 running back for the rest of the season?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, way too spicy. The thing that you want to, like, it's on one hand, Breece Hall was unlucky. He got tackled on the 1 yard line twice, and Michael Carter came in and scored the 2 touchdowns there. On the other hand, he also was a little lucky to have the big plays. One of them, the defense just forgot he existed. He just started running, and they were like, "Who? What?" And then they ran him down from behind. He's good, but no, he's not a top 5 guy for the rest of the year. Not least because as much as it seems like you and I, Dave, were right that, you know, people were probably not giving, they were imagining that the first couple week usage was going to be the full season usage. I don't think Michael Carter goes away. Like, it's probably still going to be like a 2/3, 1/3 split. And that's okay. Like, that's the NFL now. There aren't, you listed the running backs at the beginning of the show that don't have the 2/3, 1/3 split. But it factors. And I don't love the Jets offense in general. And I haven't viewed my comp right now, having seen 5 games of Breece Hall, is like less explosive Josh Jacobs, which I love. Josh Jacobs.
Comp. That is a great comp.
So it's not an insult because I love Josh Jacobs, but like he doesn't quite have that lateral burst. He doesn't quite have that first step, but he's a weeble. You know, he's a bowling ball. He's just got that butt and those legs, and he is really, really hard to tackle. Guys are flying off of him. So I like him a lot. No, I wouldn't say top 5 running back.
Yeah, and I think top 5 is probably a little bit steep, but does he fall into the top 10 for you, or is that even a little bit too spicy?
Yeah, too steep. I can tell you, I have rest of the season ranks. I got to count. I got 5. I got 6. I got 7. I got
Dalvin ahead of him.
I do. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. He's
like
17.
It's like that Price is Right game where the like mountains going up.
You're
waiting to see where it's gonna stop. Yeah.
Where's 17? Here's a question for you: Ken Walker for the rest of the year, or Breece Hall for the rest of the year?
For me, it's got to be Breece Hall, and I like Ken Walker a lot. I really do, but what we've seen from Pete Carroll, you know, I think people have this idea that Ken Walker is just going to suddenly come out and get 22, 25 touches per game. And it doesn't matter. Even when Chris Carson was running at his absolute prime, looking like a phenomenal running back, he was still ceding touches to Alex Collins and DJ Dallas. So I like Kenneth Walker, but I think that he's probably going to fall more into that like 14 to 18 touches per game rather than the 20 plus that a lot of people have envisioned.
That's a great point.
One other thing I want to talk about in this game, though, and talking about the Jets specifically, and I cannot believe that we're having this conversation now heading into week 6, but Taylor, is it time to drop Elijah Moore?
That hurts.
I know it does.
I think, though, it is probably fine to drop because, you know, he kind of fell behind Corey Davis a little bit last week. Was that a 1-week thing? Is it a trend? I don't know. Even if Elijah Moore climbs back to wide receiver 2 on his own team, I mean, I look at it, he's still tethered to a quarterback that completes a little over half his passes, isn't likely going to be passing for 275 or 300 yards a game. So it feels like a lower ceiling, even if he gets up into the second option in that passing game. So I'm okay dropping at this point, unless you've got the deep bench to hold him.
Yeah. Chris, I see you nodding along here. That's kind of where I'm at. Unless you've got like 10 bench spots, I don't know why you're clogging it with Elijah Moore.
Well, then why are you clogging it with any of them? Because aren't they kind of the same? Like, I feel like week to week, I'm not seeing a lot of deference to Corey Davis. Corey Davis's one huge game was like 4 catches on a hurry up drive at the very end of a game that they wound up coming back to win. I don't know who's the 2. I don't really know who's the 1. This week, I'm just looking at my ranks. I have Garrett Wilson 30. This is bye week. Garrett Wilson 36, Elijah Moore 40, Corey Davis 43.
So like, no confidence in any of them, really.
No confidence, but like, are they droppable? Like there are going to be some 6-team bye weeks coming up.
Yeah.
That the question is, can you find someone better for when you get the unlucky bye week and your top 2 receivers are out? But then again, do you care that much that you dropped Elijah Moore and now you have to use Isaiah McKenzie? Like, it's a great point. You just kind of get who you get at that point. I'll put it this way: if I'm in a league and someone dropped Elijah Moore, I wouldn't be like, that person's, really dumb and I have to rush out and get him. I would probably feel like, should I? I don't, just exactly. I think, we all probably value them the same. It's just a matter of like, in your league, how valuable is that level of player?
The way I look at it, I would much rather stash a guy on my bench like Joshua Kelly or Jaylen Warren than Elijah Moore, because realistically, Elijah Moore probably isn't making it into your starting lineup. And if you get to the point where injuries hit, you could probably just snag somebody off waivers that you can plug in as a wide receiver, or the contingent value from those running backs that are a tweaked ankle away from getting an RB1 workload. I would just much rather cut bait with Elijah Moore. And if he has a couple spike weeks here through the end of the rest of the season, I'll live with that. But I would rather stash those running backs that have much higher upside at a position that is so much harder to fill. But let's stick on this matchup, the Jets and the Packers. And there is one last question I have to wrap up this show here. Romeo Doubs and Allen Lazard, they have both been effective. We don't really know how Christian Watson and Amari Rodgers and Randall Cobb, how they're going to look week to week. But I think that we can say now, after looking at 4 weeks with the full squad, that Allen Lazard and Romeo Doubs are at least atop the list as the 1 and 2. After last week, though, who knows, what role Randall Cobb has carved out for himself. But is there any sort of upside with these guys? And Chris, you can start us off here, because what we've seen so far is a relatively high floor, but we have yet to see a ceiling game from either of these guys. Is that just what we should expect for the rest of the season?
The rest of the season with the Packers is really tough to say, because I have had the feeling watching them that they're trying to be that team that when they get to December, they're very different than they were in September. They're trying to start really conservatively and win games as conservative as they can while Rodgers develops a rapport with, I think, probably Doubs. I think that's the one who, because Lazard is what he is. He's usable. He's a pretty good bet to score a touchdown. He's a pretty good red zone weapon. He's not going to ever be a high volume player. He just doesn't get open. But Doubs has a chance. It's just that right now, if I had to choose, I would actually take Lazard over Doubs, because I think there are times where Doubs doesn't look like he knows what he's doing. And also where we are in the Packers season. Like, it's funny, in that London game against the Giants, it felt to me like they were like, oh crap, we better start throwing, because, you know, we're starting to fall behind in a game that we thought we had no problem. And it didn't look very good. You know, it was a lot of Randall Cobb 7-yard button hooks, and looks great in the box score, but sure didn't help them that much on the field. They're probably aiming to be a pretty different offense at some point, one that more convincingly can take the top off of a defense and therefore make the running backs more effective and make throwing to the running backs more effective. Like, everything right now feels really like bottled up, and that, you know, they're just sort of protecting themselves against negative plays. I don't know. That was not a direct answer to your question. I don't think we know yet.
I could do a whole show just on the Packers, because I mean, it looks like what this Packers offense is all right, let's get the ball into Aaron Jones' hand as much as we can. And then while Aaron Jones is getting a breather and we can't give the ball to him, let's just try to stay afloat and not be a liability by getting the ball to anybody else. Because AJ Dillon is a guy that I was really, really hyped up about this offseason, and he has somehow looked like clunky and not as good as he has for the first 2 seasons. You know, Allen Lazard, like you said, he struggles to get open. He makes these really fun highlight catches every once in a while, but hasn't really produced any sort of spike week yet in fantasy. So really, I mean, it's just the Aaron Jones show. And then let's try not to lose yards when Aaron Jones isn't ripping off big chunk plays. But Taylor, I guess same question to you with Doubs and Lazard. Do you prefer one or the other this week or rest of season?
I mean, I don't know about rest of the season. I think this week, though, I probably would stick with Lazard, because, like Chris said, he's pretty good for a touchdown, or at least an opportunity to catch a touchdown. And I don't know. I mean, the New York Giants haven't necessarily this week specifically, their opponent. They haven't really faced a gauntlet of quarterbacks, although they did give up. Oh, is it the Jets? My bad. Yeah. They did give up 275 and 3 to Joe Burrow. But other than that, they haven't faced a lot of great quarterbacks. But they've been pretty good against the pass. I mean, Sauce Gardner's, you know, lived up to the bill so far as a rookie, it seems like. So they have a good defense. This feels like one of those games where we know Green Bay's the better team, but it's lower scoring than what we think. And it's like, do either of those options excite you? But if I'm picking between them, I guess I'm taking Lazard and hoping for the touchdown.
All right. Got all the everything I wanted to hear. 2 guys both going pro Lazard. Before we sign off here, though, one more time, Chris, let everyone know where they can find your podcast, website, social media, all that good stuff.
harrisfootball.com and at harrisfootball everywhere.
Very easy. Taylor, same to you. Let everyone know where they can find you on social media and where they can find your podcast.
Absolutely. At _ Taylor Cornell on Twitter, and the podcast is the Who Dey Den.
And of course, I'm Dave Kluge. You can find me on Twitter at Dave Kluge. Subscribe at youtube.com/footballguys to check out all of the Football Guys content. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Thank you for tuning in. As always, be sure to give us a thumbs up if you like the video. That's going to help some other audiences find this. If you're listening to it on podcast, please write a review, because that also helps expand our audience. If you got anything to add on YouTube, drop it in the replies below. If you have not already followed me on Twitter, you can do that at Dave Kluge. That's Kluge. Want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you so much for checking out episode 50 of The Launchpad. We'll be back next week. Thank you so much for tuning in.